It began with silence. A thin frost lay across the tarmac at Rechlin, Germany's secret flight testing ground, as a shape unlike any other fighter in the Luftwaffe inventory shimmered in the morning haze. Two slender booms stretched rearward like prongs of some metallic predator, converging on a nacelle that looked too small to command such power. The aircraft's surface gleamed in bare aluminum, its skin smooth and cold under the touch of curious German hands. Stenciled faintly beneath hastily repainted Balkenkreuze were the ghosted letters U.S. Army. The machine was a Lockheed P-38 Lightning, captured intact after an emergency landing in Italy. Around it stood a circle of engineers in gray overcoats, clipboards pressed against the biting wind, trying to decipher what they saw. 2 engines, 2 tails, 1 mind. They had expected an ungainly beast, something too heavy to dance in combat. Yet here was a machine that seemed to defy symmetry itself, twin Allison V-1710 engines turning opposite directions, counteracting torque until the aircraft sat level even at takeoff. "Es ist kein Jagdflugzeug," one engineer muttered. "It's no fighter." But the chief designer beside him, Dr. Karl Bauer, shook his head. "Nein, it is something new." In that instant, the paradox was set. How could an aircraft so strange, so seemingly inefficient, have carved its name into Allied air superiority across 2 hemispheres? The question would drive months of obsessive disassembly, test flights, and argument inside Hangar 4A, because what they would find hidden in that American machine was not just technology, but an idea Germany had never truly embraced. To understand their astonishment, one must return to the pre-war skies of 1937. When the U.S. Army Air Corps issued a challenge that most engineers dismissed as fantasy: design an interceptor that could reach 20,000 feet in under 6 minutes, exceed 360 miles per hour, and carry enough fuel to patrol 1,000 miles from base. Lockheed, still a relatively small firm on the edge of Los Angeles, responded with something audacious. Under Chief Designer Clarence Kelly Johnson, a 27-year-old aerodynamic prodigy, they sketched a shape that seemed to break every rule of fighter design: twin engines housed in slim booms, a central pod for the pilot and armament, tricycle landing gear to keep the nose steady on takeoff, and turbo-superchargers buried deep inside the tail sections to squeeze power from thin air. When Johnson presented his Model 22 prototype to the Air Corps, the board reportedly sat in silence for nearly a minute before one colonel said, "It looks like 2 airplanes mated in flight." The concept promised performance bordering on the impossible. Each Allison V-1710 engine produced 1,150 horsepower, driving a Curtiss electric constant-speed propeller. At full climb, both units gulped 200 gallons of 100-octane fuel per hour, yet the combined thrust could push the prototype past 410 miles per hour, a speed unthinkable for a twin-engine fighter of that era. What made it revolutionary was redundancy. Either engine could sustain level flight alone. American test pilots quickly realized they could lose half their power plant and still limp home, an advantage no German single-engine fighter would ever match. Lockheed's gamble was enormous. The P-38's unit cost approached $134,000, more than double a P-40 Warhawk, and it required ground crews trained in both aviation hydraulics and turbo-supercharger maintenance. Yet by late 1941, the United States possessed something unique: a long-range interceptor capable of flying above 30,000 feet at 425 miles per hour. In theory, it was the perfect strategic escort. In practice, it was temperamental, demanding, and often lethal to the untrained. Compressibility shock at high speed could lock its controls solid. Early models suffered catastrophic dives that shattered airframes beyond 480 mm. Cockpits overheated under solar glare. Maintenance teams cursed the miles of oil lines and hydraulic loops that crisscrossed its fuselage. But every improvement, vented radiators, dive flaps, cockpit insulation, turned the Lightning into a more mature predator. By 1943, the P-38 had become the eyes and claws of the U.S. Army Air Forces in distant theaters. Its twin booms carried not only engines but also symbolic weight. One pointed toward the Pacific, the other toward Europe. In the jungles of New Guinea, Major Richard Bong racked up 40 victories. In the North African campaign, Lightnings escorted B-17s over the Mediterranean. Their range extended to 2,600 miles, with twin 165-gallon drop tanks. To the Luftwaffe, reports of the twin-tailed devil sounded exaggerated, perhaps propaganda. German fighter doctrine insisted that agility came only from minimal weight and a single power plant. The Messerschmitt Bf-109G, with its Daimler-Benz DB605 engine delivering 1,475 horsepower, represented their pinnacle of design philosophy. Compact, elegant, handcrafted for dogfights measured in seconds. The notion of a twin-engine interceptor thriving in close combat seemed absurd. Then, in August 1943, the absurd landed in their backyard. Over central Italy, a P-38G from the 96th Fighter Squadron developed engine trouble during a reconnaissance sweep, and unable to climb on one engine, bellied into a wheat field near Grosseto. The pilot, Lieutenant Dale D. Klon, was captured within an hour. The aircraft, miraculously intact save for a bent propeller and minor undercarriage damage, drew the attention of the Luftwaffe's Technical Intelligence Branch, the Versuchsverband Oberbefehlshaber der Luftwaffe. Within days, the Lightning was crated, trucked north, and reassembled at Rechlin under heavy guard. Its new designation, P-38 US, Versuchs number 23. The Germans treated it like an alien artifact. The first inspection team, led by Bauer and engine specialist Erwin Lyers, cataloged each component down to the rivet type. Construction of twin booms seems wasteful. Their memorandum dated 12th of September 1943 recorded, "Yet balance of mass is extraordinary." They noted the mirror image layout of fuel, oil, and turbocharger systems, each side a mechanical twin of the other, ensuring stability if one failed. Counter-rotating propellers canceled torque. This, they realized, explained the aircraft's smooth takeoffs. The engineers dismantled the Allison engines, discovering the secret weapon, a General Electric B-33 turbo-supercharger feeding compressed air at consistent pressure even above 30,000 feet. German fighters, by contrast, relied on mechanical superchargers that bled efficiency with altitude. A Bf-109G lost nearly a third of its power above 25,000 feet. The air around the disassembly pit carried the metallic scent of warm aluminum and the faint sweetness of 100-octane residue. Wrenches clinked against the cylinder banks as mechanics turned each bolt methodically, documenting everything in blue ink notebooks. One observer, test pilot Hans-Werner Lerche, scribbled a private note later filed in Flugbericht No. 92. Engines respond like synchronized pistons of one mind. No torquey, no twist. It flies as though each half waits for the other to breathe. The line would be quoted decades, later by aviation historians trying to capture that first sense of mechanical harmony. Rechlin's engineers were equally struck by what they called industrielle Vernunft, industrial reason. Every panel was labeled with maintenance codes. Every pipe was standardized to American thread size. Wiring looms could be detached and replaced as whole units. To men accustomed to bespoke German craftsmanship, this modular simplicity felt almost crude, yet undeniably practical. Where the Me-110 required 9 hours of maintenance per sortie, they calculated the Lightning could be serviced in less than 3. It was, as one technician remarked, an airplane built by a factory that already knew how to win a war. As the stripped fuselage gleamed under hangar lamps, Bauer realized that the Lightning's most radical feature wasn't its engines but its philosophy. The aircraft had been designed for pilots who might not be aces, maintained by crews who might never see a university, built in plants staffed by women who had never turned a wrench before the war. Its strength lay not in genius but in accessibility. The Germans could copy its lines, perhaps even its engines, but not the mindset that produced it, a mindset that valued scale over perfection, redundancy over elegance, output over artistry. Outside, snow began to fall across the Rechlin runway, muffling the distant growl of test engines. Within weeks, the Luftwaffe would attempt to fly their prize and measure its secrets in the cold air above Mecklenburg. But for now, the captured P-38 stood silent, its twin propellers aligned like sentinels. The engineers packed their tools, uncertain whether they had uncovered a marvel or a warning. They did not yet realize that what they had dissected was not merely an aircraft, it was the blueprint of an industrial system that would outlast their Reich. When the snow finally melted on the Rechlin airfield, the captured P-38 Lightning rolled again under its own power. Its engines, refitted with German spark plugs and fresh glycol coolant, coughed to life with a metallic bark that startled the mechanics. The opposing propellers spun in perfect mirror rhythm, their airflow converging in a shimmering cone behind the fuselage. German test pilot Hans-Werner Lersche eased the throttles forward. The twin Allison V-1710 F5s climbing through 2,600 RPM, and the aircraft began its first taxi run under the Reich's flag. The vibration was smoother than any twin the Luftwaffe possessed. Not even the Me-410 or Ju-88 could match it. Throttle response immediate, no yaw tendency, he noted in his report of 28 of February 1944. Landing gear behavior stable, steering excellent, engine noise harmonic, unlike any Daimler or BMW series. When he lifted off seconds later, the machine rose so cleanly that onlookers thought he'd misjudged rotation speed. In fact, the aircraft needed only 1,500 feet to take off, half that of a Me-110G under the same load. At altitude, Lersche discovered the Lightning's second miracle, the turbo-superchargers' relentless pressure. At 30,000 feet, the manifold gauge still read 42 inches, an impossible figure for any German piston engine. In a radio transmission recorded by ground engineers, his voice came through excited but composed. Leistung konstant, keine Leistungsverlust bis 30,000. Constant power, no loss up to 30,000. The data logged that day stunned the Rechlin staff. Climb rate 3,900 feet per minute, top speed measured at 414 miles per hour, fuel burn 210 gallons per hour at military power. With external tanks, the Lightning's combat radius stretched past 1,000 miles. The Luftwaffe's workhorse Bf-109G managed barely 420. Lersche landed after 45 minutes, taxied to a stop, and simply stared through the glass canopy before shutting down. Later, he wrote privately, "I felt as though I had flown something built 10 years in our future." Lersche, Flugbuch, March 1944. For days, the engineers pored over their flight logs, arguing in the test mess under clouds of cigarette smoke. Some claimed the Lightning's success was pure horsepower, a brute force expression of America's oil wealth. Others saw subtler genius, its ability to survive damage, its pilot-friendly stability, its modular maintenance. They ran fuel analyses, identifying a 100 130 grade aviation gasoline, far richer in tetraethyl lead than Germany's synthetic B4 blend, explaining part of the engine's resilience. They compared turbocharger flow diagrams, discovering the General Electric unit's dual wastegate system that maintained precise boost even during throttle changes, a sophistication no German design had matched. Bauer concluded bluntly in his memorandum to Göring's technical staff, "We could replicate the airframe, but not the industrial ecosystem that feeds it." The Luftwaffe's technical branch attempted partial imitation anyway. Junkers engineers experimented with a captured GE turbo-supercharger, reverse engineering the impeller blade's curvature to adapt it for the BMW 801D radial. The attempt failed. Germany lacked the heat-resistant Inconel alloy used in the American turbine housings. When tested at Dessau in April 1944, the prototype unit melted its blades after 17 minutes of operation at 700 degrees exhaust temperature. The report labeled the concept theoretically superior but materially impossible. Meanwhile, operational commanders at the front begged for more practical insights. Could they adapt tactics based on what the Lightning revealed? From Rechlin's flight trials emerged one crucial finding that would ripple through German doctrine. Speed in itself was not decisive. Sustained performance was. The P-38 could cruise at 360 miles per hour for hours, something the Me-109G could achieve only in short bursts. That endurance gave American pilots freedom to choose when to fight and when to flee. Luftwaffe ace Günther Rahl, interviewed after the war, recalled his first encounter with the Lightning over the Balkans. They came from nowhere, 2 at first, then 4. They were not faster in a dive, but they stayed. Always above, always turning back for another pass. His description aligned exactly with U.S. combat reports. The P-38's high-altitude stamina and steady roll rate at speed made it deadly in slashing attacks. At Rechlin, Lurch's second flight explored dive characteristics. Past 450 miles per hour, the control forces stiffened alarmingly, confirming Allied accounts of compressibility lock. Yet even in this danger lay insight. The Germans realized that the Lightning's flaws were not random, but consequences of reaching aerodynamic frontiers they themselves had only begun to study. Their own Me-262 jet prototype would later face similar high-speed issues. In that sense, the captured American machine became an unwitting teacher. Engineers plotted its pressure distributions, mapping where airflow detached from the wing at Mach 68, data that quietly influenced later German transonic research. It is an irony, wrote aerodynamics chief Hermann Baerbohm, that our enemy's airplane shows us our own future. But beyond the laboratory, the war was turning. By mid-1944, Allied bombers poured across the Reich daily, escorted by hundreds of P-51 Mustangs and still more P-38s. Factories like Rechlin were under constant threat. By June, evacuation plans were underway. Still, the engineers refused to ground their prize. They painted camouflage modeling over its silver skin, fitted a few G-16 radio, and prepared one last endurance flight to gather range data. Lurch took off with half fuel, climbed to 25,000 feet, throttled back to 60% power, and held course northeast for an hour. When he landed, his stopwatch showed 2 hours 47 minutes of flight and fuel consumption of just 160 gallons, an efficiency unmatched by any German twin-engine type. The Rechlin report's closing line was uncharacteristically emotional. The American machine demonstrates not superiority in concept, but in realization. We have been out-manufactured. Within weeks, that report reached Berlin, where Luftwaffe planners met intense briefings at the Reich Air Ministry. Piles of paper documented production shortfalls, Me-109 output crippled by bombing, fuel reserves down 45%, aluminum shortages forcing wooden tail sections on late-series fighters. Reading Bauer's summary, one colonel asked bitterly, "So the answer is to build this Lightning ourselves?" The room fell silent. Bauer responded, "The answer is to have started in 1938. His point was simple. The Lightning represented an industrial maturity the Reich could no longer achieve. Its performance was not the miracle of one airplane, but the product of a system that could produce 10,000 such. Miracles without pause. The captured aircraft continued to fly sporadically through early summer, often for propaganda photographs. Yet even those who admired its engineering sensed futility. Pilots debated whether a German equivalent could have changed the war's air balance. Statistically, perhaps not. By the time Lurch's third test concluded, Lockheed's factories at Burbank and Dallas had delivered over 8,700 P-38s. U.S. production capacity was churning out 400 Lightnings a month, each consuming 25,000 labor hours, but assembled on moving lines that never stopped for shortages. Germany's entire monthly output of advanced fighters, Me-262s, FW-190s, and Me-109s combined, barely reached 1/200. In raw aluminum alone, America poured 300,000 tons per year into aircraft. The Reich, strangled by bombing, produced less than 60,000. The disparity rendered technical admiration irrelevant. As Barr would write in his final wartime diary entry, "Our machines are still art, theirs have become arithmetic." Back on the Rechlin flight line, the Lightning's metal skin dulled under months of dust. Its once bright insignia faded beneath over-painted crosses. The twin booms, so alien at first sight, now seemed almost familiar, a silhouette of what might have been. The engineers who had dismantled it were being reassigned, some to underground factories, others to jet programs that would never mature. When the Allies finally advanced north in 1945, they found the P-38 sitting forlorn at the edge of the frozen Rechlin runway, its nose half buried in snow, both propellers removed for scrap. The logbooks were still there, locked in a tin cabinet beside the hangar wall. American technical intelligence officers opened them and found meticulous German handwriting, charts of fuel curves, compressor ratios, thermal maps drawn in ink. Someone had even noted the resonance frequency of the propeller shafts. That someone was almost certainly Bauer. His last recorded entry, dated 12th of January 1945, read simply, Engines remarkable in balance, impossible to reproduce without their metallurgy. Those pages became part of Operation Lusty, the U.S. effort to gather German aeronautical data. Ironically, they now sat beside American reports dissecting the Me-262 and He-162 proof that both sides had spent the war studying the other's shadows. When historians later pieced together the story, they realized how much that single captured airplane had revealed about the contrasting philosophies of two industrial powers. Germany had built its air force as an instrument of national will, elegant but narrow, its machines designed for short-range campaigns over Europe's compact battlefields. America, by contrast, engineered for oceans. The P-38's design began not with tactics but with logistics, the demand for an aircraft that could fly 2,000 miles, fight, and come home without a shipborne base. That requirement shaped every detail. The twin engines for safety across vast water, the turbo-superchargers for performance in thin Pacific air, the tricycle landing gear for high takeoff weights on primitive runways. It was less a fighter than a system, the physical embodiment of global strategy. German officers examining its range charts saw distances that dwarfed their own war map. To them, the Lightning's wingspan of 52 feet was not extravagance, but geography turned into aluminum. Technically, the Rechlin engineers never solved the riddle of the P-38's synchronized engines. The counter-rotating propellers, driven by left and right-handed crankshafts, canceled torque completely. Germany had built counter-rotating prototypes, the DO 335 and experimental Me 309, but never standardized the manufacturing of mirrored engine components. The Lightning did it on a production line. Each side of its airframe was a reflection, a feat of industrial symmetry requiring thousands of precision-machined parts. Its Allison V-1710s produced 1,225 horsepower apiece, yet together they delivered vibration lower than a single-engined fighter half its size. During tests at Rechlin, vibration sensors recorded amplitudes under 0.02 inches at full power. The Me-410 registered 0.07. Such stability meant longer structural life, steadier gunnery, and less pilot fatigue, a hidden advantage impossible to quantify until one flew it. In the months after the war, fragments of that knowledge seeded the next generation. French and Soviet engineers studied the captured reports. The Soviets' Yak-9U turbo project borrowed heavily from the P-38's intercooler layout. Even German scientists brought to the United States under Operation Paperclip referenced their Lightning notes when working on early American jets. One of them, Baerbohm, later admitted in a 1953 interview, "We learned humility from that airplane. It showed that reliability can be as revolutionary as speed." His remark echoed the silent confession written between every line of those Rechlin reports that technical mastery without an industrial backbone is merely art, and art cannot win wars fought by arithmetic, standing today in museums restored. Lightnings gleaming under spotlights, the aircraft's design still carries the cold intelligence that once bewildered its examiners. Each rivet line is a record of a nation that could build precision on an oceanic scale. The German engineers who touched it had spent careers chasing performance through genius. The Americans achieved it through systematized competence. In the end, that difference mattered more than horsepower, armor, or climb rate. The P-38 was not perfect. It compressed in dives, it was heavy on controls, it demanded disciplined maintenance, but it did what its designers promised every time, in every theater. And that consistency, multiplied by thousands, broke the Luftwaffe more surely than any single invention. If one could listen now to those twin engines, thick, even relentless, their sound would carry the rhythm of industrial war at its peak. A symphony of balanced pistons and organized labor, of assembly lines moving faster than enemy theory. The German engineers at Rechlin didn't just witness an airplane, they glimpsed the world's new arithmetic of power. The P-38's secret was never its speed or its guns. It was the quiet certainty that when it returned from one mission, 10 more were already waiting on the factory floor. That was the melody the Reich never learned to play. By the time the war ended, the Rechlin airfield lay silent, its concrete fractured by frost and shellfire. The hangar where the Lightning had once stood was gutted, the test benches overturned, the smell of scorched oil hanging like a final reminder of vanished ambition. Among the ruins, American troops found fragments of its turbo piping, melted and bent into the mud, a final relic of an idea dissected too late. They photographed the wreckage, tagged it for intelligence, and moved on. Yet for those who had once touched that machine, Lurk, Bauer, Baerbohm, it remained a phantom of what might have been. In letters written after the war, Bauer admitted that the P-38 taught him, "The real weapon is process." Bauer, Private Correspondence, 1947. He meant that the Americans had built a system where every machine fed the next. Every lesson was absorbed instantly by industry. Germany's engineers could match brilliance for brilliance, but they could never scale it. When Lockheed's production reached its zenith in 1944, one P-38 left the assembly line every 17 hours. Each aircraft consumed over 5,400 pounds of duralumin, 400 feet of wiring, and 20,000 rivets, numbers that read like poetry to an engineer but like defeat to a nation struggling to find copper and coal. The Luftwaffe's factories, dispersed and starving, managed a fraction of that. At Augsburg, men built Me-262s by lantern light while Allied bombers thundered overhead. At Burbank, women riveters listened to swing music on the radio as they worked through the night. Two wars, two kinds of modernity. The Lightning was simply the mechanical voice of one. After the war, surviving Lightnings flew reconnaissance over Japan, mapping the ruins of Tokyo, then served in Korea as trainers before fading from frontline use. But the lessons they embodied never disappeared. The German engineers who studied it carried fragments of its DNA into every jet program that followed. The British incorporated its intercooler concepts into early meteors. The Americans borrowed its twin-engine spacing for later long-range interceptors. Even Soviet designers admitted its endurance philosophy shaped their P-2 successors. What began as a captured curiosity became a silent foundation for the next era of flight. In 1955, at a NATO symposium in Bonn, a gray-haired Hermann Baerbohm was asked by a journalist what single aircraft had impressed him most in his career. He paused for a long time, then answered simply, "The Lightning," because it proved the enemy's machines could think. His remark was not praise of sentience, but of design philosophy, the sense that the P-38 had been built to anticipate problems before they occurred, a product of planning rather than improvisation. "We engineered instinctively," he later wrote. They engineered systematically. Baerbohm, Aerotechnik und Geist, 1956. Even decades later, when post-war documentaries replay the black and white footage of that captured P-38 taxiing across a German airfield, the image retains its quiet charge. The Luftwaffe officers in their greatcoats watching from the edge of the runway could not know that they were witnessing not just a foreign airplane, but the material expression of a different century arriving ahead of schedule. The Lightning's twin booms framed more than an engine. They framed the industrial logic of the modern world: standardization, reliability, predictability. The kind of strength that can only come from abundance. As dusk fell over Rechlin that final winter, the wind moved through the empty hangars like the whisper of machinery that would never run again. The war had devoured everything: men, fuel, alloys, dreams. Yet in that silence, the truth remained fixed in the memory of every engineer who had touched the captured P-38. They had seen what balanced power truly meant, what synchronization on both sides of a war could achieve when measured not by genius but by coordination. In the Lightning's mirrored engines, they saw themselves reflected, brilliant, determined, but divided by scarcity and time. The story of that aircraft ends not with an explosion or a victory roll, but with understanding. The Germans who examined it did not envy its speed. They envied its reliability. They did not fear its guns. They feared its production line. For all their intellect, they realized that wars of the future would be decided less in laboratories than in logistics depots, less by inspiration than by execution. The P-38 was not just faster or stronger, it was inevitable. And when its twin propellers carved the cold air over Rechlin for the last time, they sang the anthem of a new kind of warfare, one driven not by brilliance alone, but by balance, precision, and scale.